Hey everybody, Jake here with TrendSpider to go over a midweek video looking at the broad markets and a few different case studies looking at the market into the rest of the week and what's already happened this week. And what I want to focus on here is this big chunk of volume. This is something that you'll see at different parts of any chart that you're looking at. Essentially, we've gone over this big chunk of volume and what it means before. But essentially what we've got here on SPY, looking at the daily chart, looking at the raindrop chart, we can see that we're pretty much stuck. The last, let's say, 3.5, 4 weeks have pretty much been literally chopping back and forth. If you look at my current mouse here, you'll see if I do just a kind of general overview of what we've done here, we've pretty much just gone up and down and just literally just kind of chopped here. And so we're trading right between this huge area where a majority of the shares are holding since this reversal on February 19th, which was the high before the reversal that we started into what is pretty much a historical move to the downside now. But this is where the status quo changed. I want to know, since the high in February on SPY, where are a majority of those shares holding? And you'll see that they are right around this 280, anywhere from around 276 to around 283 is where a majority of shares are holding. So the price is pretty much stuck here, right in between that zone and then this resistance line. So one thing that is always important is to always look at multiple charts. With SPY, this is just one part of the market. We want to look at another part and see, is there strength elsewhere? So if we look at SPY, we'll see we have not broken through this resistance line yet. But let's go to something like QQQ and we'll see something very different here. You'll see that the Qs have actually already broken through this area that we have not gotten through yet on SPY. So we're almost like ahead of the game here on the Qs relative to SPY. You can see, same exact thing. We've got this big demand zone here that we have on SPY, except instead of being below this red line like we have on SPY, we have made our way through it on the Qs. And one thing that I want to show that's really interesting about this, if you kind of compare the last two daily candles versus the last two raindrops, you'll see something very interesting here. You'll see that the hollow candles have not necessarily been the most I want to say motivating candles to look at. You can see here the first candle here, we did not actually break through resistance. However, if you look, we actually did break through resistance in regards to volume. There was quite a bit of volume above this trend line, and then today you can see that we continued up. Now today, notice that we closed near the low of the day around 218, and we pretty much tested that area that was previous resistance, now support. But if we look at the raindrop, you'll see today's raindrop, look at all of that volume located at the top of the range here. So if you compare this to the regular candle, you'll see that even though we have this big wick, most of that volume was in the wick today. So this does not necessarily mean, hey, most of the buyers were at the top of the range here, we're going to go up. But it does tell us a different story than what we're seeing here on the regular hollow candle. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing, this is pretty similar to what we just went over, but Apple. I mean, Apple is literally a perfect example of this as well, where today you had that continuation where yesterday you weren't necessarily sure if we were going to continue, because look at all of that kind of uncertainty there into the close yesterday, meaning we've got those sellers coming in and driving the price down. However, all of those sellers that came through, we want to know where the buyers were, because for every seller there is a buyer. So we want to know for all of those buyers that kind of came in to absorb those shares that somebody was driving on the market. That's why we dropped in price. You can see somebody was there to absorb most of those shares above the trend line, and then you've got your continuation up. And look today, we've got this big wick here, but then with the regular versus the raindrop, you'll see looking at the raindrop, a lot of that volume is near the top of the range where you can't see much information at all about the volume with just the regular candle. So being able to see where that volume is located above the trend line has proved crucial this week if you're trying to trade those breakout setups. So that is Apple. I want to show an example here using the anchored volume by price, kind of going back to not looking at the raindrops here for a second. I want to show you guys an interesting thing. We talked a lot about these blocks of volume. We've got this one here on shop. Notice what you'll see here is if we anchored the volume profile, meaning if we start the volume profile from February 12th, which was the high here, you can see a majority of the volume was really holding pretty much right here. So we know, because technically if we start the volume profile for here, you can see that we've only really had, see what I'm doing here? I'm just creating these arrows showing where the price has been. So notice that we've been at this price right around 600. This was the first day we were there. This was the second day, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, 9th, 10th. So obviously this looks very ugly and it's like, why is he drawing all of these arrows? What I'm trying to show you guys is this was only 10 trading days. And if we start the volume profile since February 12th, we can see that it only took 12 trading days for us to have most of the volume at this area. So we know when the price broke out and got to this 620 area, there was a lot of shares accumulating here, and you had this volume creating a base for the next leg up. Now, the thing about this is, just because volume is creating a base does not mean price cannot break down. I mean, if you look at the airlines, you look at GE right now. I mean, talk about an absolute just bloodbath here. And it's not necessarily a bloodbath on the common stock side because we haven't really moved. But if you're someone that's trading options or watching the options chains, any of these positions, GE, Delta, United, I mean, they're getting destroyed because they're not moving. They're just sitting there. And sure, we've got a lot of shares holding at this level, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're just going to get this huge, massive move like we had in shop and just continue there. You can see that in a fundamentally kind of not sound stock like Delta, something that's not having necessarily the best forward-looking guidance, especially when nobody really knows what's going to happen with the coronavirus. You can see that you're not always going to have that spike like you had with shop. So just because you see a big area of shares holding at a specific level does not mean that the price can't drop. This is an example on Cron as well. This is an example that we went over last weekend. Same type of thing. This is pretty much across the entire marijuana market or sector. So this isn't just Cron. If you looked at CGC or Tilray, you'd see the same thing. But, same type of thing here where with Cron, notice that we tried to break out. We pulled back. We're now pretty much right at where everybody is holding since this reversal. Since January 21st, pretty much the 2020 high so far, if we start the volume profile from there, you'll see that the price is pretty much right at this zone. But does this mean that the price can't drop below? No. It just means that if the price does, let's say, drop down to here, where the circle is, that just means the average person who is holding since this period. And so, we can define that by a couple different ways, right? The anchored VWAP is telling us the average price per share traded since this point, which is way up here at 644. So then the average price per share would be holding at a negative 17% loss. And then if you just compare the actual shares and where that big volume block is, and let's say that we dropped down into the low fives, then now a majority of your shares that are holding here are also holding at a loss, not just your average price per share. So, just because we show all these volume blocks and all of that does not mean that this is like, the bottom or the top. Roku is another great example of this, where Roku, we had this example where we were pretty much trading right at the point of control since this reversal here on February 14th, which happened to be the earnings. And so you can see that this initially was kind of our area of resistance, right? When we moved up, you had this big block here. It wasn't as defined as it is now because we've had a lot of shares traded here over the last couple weeks. But you'll see that, notice that the price tried to break down, but there were so many people holding here that as soon as the price started to break down through this particular area, let's say right around, let's say we broke down right around 120, we are quickly going into like this zone of really not a lot of people holding. A majority of them are holding here. The average price, the anchored volume weighted average price, is down here at 107. So you can see this two ways. The price is pretty much trading at your point of control, which is the majority of the shares, but it is still trading above your average price per share traded, as far as like per volume share, at around 107.38. That's just average, or that's just, it's right around 107.48. But I mean, the idea is just this overall area. This is a zone rather than just a precise area. So the point is the price does like to gravitate towards these areas. Another example is SPCE. Notice here, had good earnings. What did we have? We had this reversal point on February 20th. And if we kind of anchored the volume by price and the anchored volume weighted average price, you'll see that we have created this massive demand zone here. So it's not a shocker that the price was able to catch a bid. But on top of that, you're able to see that the average volume, the volume weighted average price since February 20th is still holding way at $23-ish. So the average price per share in that was transacted since February 20th is way up here. However, you can see that we do have this big shelf of volume, which naturally does act as support because you have a majority of people holding here. So if the price starts dropping below this, most people are holding at a loss now. Supply dries up, and you've got that just those economic forces at work, the microeconomic forces at work. But just from an overall standpoint of looking at the markets in a light using the anchored volume by price, the anchored volume weighted average price created by Brian Shannon at Alphatrends, and the raindrops, these are three different things that give you a huge edge in the market, as you can just see. Remember, Apple, like without the raindrop here, you would have definitely possibly considered this not being the strongest candle because we did not close through this resistance line. But then we go to the raindrop and you are able to see that there was definitely conviction by the buyers. Any seller that came in above this trend line was met by somebody who was accumulating shares above that line. And then today you can even see that even though it was a pretty ugly regular candle, you can see a majority of that volume was holding at the top. And so showing again, buyers were in control because a majority of that volume was done at the top of the range, showing that any sellers that came in selling up here, there was somebody up there to absorb those shares. So hopefully this video helped. We will obviously be doing a weekend video, and we do have our podcast. No, it's not a podcast. I'm sorry. I got to correct myself. The stream is coming, obviously, as always, on Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern with Steven Straza. He's a technical analyst at All Star Charts. So make sure to tune into that, and we will do the video as always this weekend before that. So hopefully this helps. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being a customer at TrendSpider if you currently have an account. And if you are interested in TrendSpider and have not created an account yet, please let us know if you have any questions, and we're happy to help. Everyone, if you like this video, please make sure to comment and subscribe. And make sure to check out the one over the weekend as well. Everyone have a great second half of the week trading.